This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
Funding for this program was made possible by an American Graduate Getting to Work grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Tonight, a tale of two Charlottes. One vibrant, growing jobs, successful. The other stunted by poverty, growing hopeless, permanently poor.
The truth of the matter is we have had our hand forced, and we've been forced to look at ourselves and to look at what we haven't done well.
We'll take a hard look at the realities of moving up in our community, the attempts to bridge the gap in the shadow of segregation.
It is going to be much harder to get out of the situation if you're poor and African American than if you're poor and white.
And an atmosphere of distrust.
Put up this doggone smoke screen as if they're doing something about it.
We'll take a hard look at education, career readiness, and family stability.
Sometimes I'm at the point where I'm just like shaking because I'm doing everything by myself. Just having awareness of getting that education is something that I would like to share.
The search for real solutions continues here. Carolina Impact Economic Mobility Town Hall starts now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Amy Burkett. Mecklenburg County is rich in opportunity for many who call Charlotte home. A low unemployment rate, 6 Fortune 500 companies amid the backdrop of the financial services industry. It's fair to say Charlotte is a leader in economic development in the South. But the shine of our Queen City has dulled among the blistering realization that the paths to prosperity are not equal for all. In fact, they're too often predetermined by income, race, or zip code. We're talking about the American dream, the ability for everyone to find a good job, take care of our kids, get a meaningful education, and do better than our parents. The Equality of Opportunity Project created a firestorm in our community. It examined economic mobility in the largest 50 cities in the United States. Researchers from Stanford, Harvard, and UC Berkeley ranked Charlotte dead last. In the shadow of the report, Charlotte stepped up with a commitment to take bold action to bridge the opportunity gap, pledging to focus on the top factors limiting economic mobility as determined by an 18-month opportunity task force. Its findings, released 1 year ago, show early childhood education, college and career readiness, as well as family and child stability as the 3 most important factors. So, where are we in the fight for equality? We've gathered Charlotte's leading experts in our studio tonight to answer those questions and look at what comes next in the search for a solution. Admittedly, the South's historic problems with racial segregation make finding a solution to the economic mobility crisis all the more difficult. Carolina Impact's Jeff Saunier picks up our story from there.
Yeah, the growing, prosperous city that Charlotte wants to be, well, that's not the Charlotte that everybody sees, because the poverty that's so hard to escape here, well, it's also not that hard to find here.
I need a dollar, dollar, dollar.
It all depends where you look.
Well, I need a dollar, dollar, dollar.
And how hard you look. And it's not just the homeless. There's also poverty in block after block of these permanently poor Charlotte neighborhoods.
We are in a survival mode, you might say.
Yeah, and far too many people in our community, where you're born, the zip code where you're born, determines the outcome of where your financial state will be in life.
But United Way's executive director Sean Garrett agrees there's urgency now after the protests here in Uptown 18 months ago. When anger over a Charlotte police shooting turned into something more, translating Charlotte racial unrest into economic unrest.
This isn't right. I am sick and tired of coming here and looking at Charlotte not investing and spreading the wealth throughout this city.
We are an inclusive community. Everyone gets
Not
involved.
exactly the progressive Charlotte that civic and business leaders like to brag about.
Make all kinds of pictures, but the truth of the matter is we have had our hand forced, and we've been forced to look at ourselves and to look at what we haven't done well.
So being poor, period, is not a position anyone wants to be in. But the data will show you that it is going to be much harder to get out of the situation if you're poor and African American than if you're poor and white.
They don't value us compared to people with a whole bunch of money in their pocket.
Rexy Philpott lives here in zip code 28206, the city's poorest zip code. And what the experts call Charlotte's lack of economic mobility, well, that's what Philpott calls, everyday life.
So what they do is they'll put up this doggone smoke screen as if they doing something about it. They cater to what people want to hear. Then once it died down, ain't a damn thing being done.
I think they're still skeptical, and I think those communities have every right to still be skeptical because we still have a long ways to go, but we can't rest.
And if I share with you my story, would you share your dollar with me?
By the way, that study that ranks Charlotte 50th out of 50 cities, well, it measures the odds of someone on the lowest rung of the poverty ladder climbing all the way to the top, where the wealthiest are. But for Charlotte's low-income families, well, they say any step up the ladder for them would be a step in the right direction.
Thanks so much, Jeff. We have 3 key players in Charlotte's efforts to improve its economic mobility. Joining me now, Stephanie Luter is the first executive director of Leading on Opportunity, an organization formed to carry forward the recommendations of the Opportunity Task Force. Pamela Weidman currently serves as the director of Charlotte's Housing and Neighborhood Services Department, and Bob Morgan is the president and CEO of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, which works to promote jobs and bring new businesses to the region. And Bob, I just want to start with you. I'm hoping we can have a really honest conversation this evening, and just watching that story was uncomfortable for me, and I know your job is to always put the city in its best light so that you can attract businesses so that we have more growth and more opportunity and more hope. But how do you balance the challenge of, are we bringing the right types of jobs that will help us lead to economic mobility for all?
Well, there's a compelling argument from an economic development perspective around this subject, Amy, which is that concurrent to the work of the Opportunity Task Force, we did our own strategic plan in partnership with the Charlotte Regional Partnership. And what we learned is that in an economy with unemployment at 4%, talent acquisition is the #1 issue facing employers of virtually any size or any industry. And Charlotte does a better job than peer regions at attracting talent from elsewhere. We do a worse job than most of our peer competitors in growing the organic talent that we have. And the risk we run is that if something turned off that spigot of talent moving here from elsewhere, companies wouldn't be able to find the people that they need. That subject plays right into the hands of concentrated, multi-generational poverty, that we have people who are living amongst this prosperity. We had 1,000 companies announce 13,000 new jobs last year, and yet we have way too many people who aren't equipped to go fill those jobs. So finding the right balance to do that, jobs that might fit in one part of town, it may be a different kind of job that fits in other parts of town. We've got to do a better job of figuring that out so that the growth is more uniform across the board.
And I know we're just starting to tackle this issue, but are there any initiatives in the Chamber that are trying to help folks be prepared to get into these jobs?
Well, let's start with jobs first. Our job is to recruit and to retain and to help companies that are here to already grow, because virtually all of us, it starts with the job, right? Our ability to be productive citizens. So we continue to keep an eye on that. But there is also a role for the business community to play. What is it that's keeping people from being qualified for these jobs? That starts with education. It starts K through 12. It can start pre-K, helping to connect the business community to some of the good nonprofit work that's being done in other elements of the Opportunity Task Force discussion is a critical role that we can play. And yes, we're playing that every day to help make those connections.
Pamela, talk to us a little bit. We saw a profile in that story. His name was Rexy Philpott, and he's an amazing man who worked his whole life in blue-collar jobs. And he's worried about his neighborhood being able to stay his neighborhood as development is encroaching in it. There have been so many reports, as you well know, that we have a shortage of affordable housing. How do we save people like Rexy's neighborhood, which he said even at the end of his street, some smaller houses are being torn down and larger houses are being built, and he doesn't know how long he's going to be able to stay in the home that he's worked so hard for?
Sure. So, Amy, that's a really loaded question. So there's no one answer in terms of saving his neighborhood, but within Housing and Neighborhood Services, not only do we do affordable housing, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but a part of our role is about empowering people, right? So we do things like neighborhood board retreats to teach people how to come out, how to build, how to empower them, how to build their neighborhoods, and how to maintain their neighborhoods and make them grow. From an affordable housing perspective, you're right. There's no secret in Charlotte. We have a shortage of affordable housing. We're never going to build our way out of our our need for affordable housing. So not only do we work to build new affordable housing, but we also work to preserve existing single-family housing, existing multifamily housing, albeit we haven't done a lot in terms of preserving existing multifamily, but that is one of our strategies that we're looking at, how to do more of maintaining existing multifamily. So it's a combination of things. We also try to create new homeowners through a program called our House Charlotte Down Payment Assistance Program, where we provide up to $8,000 of down payment assistance to help people become homeowners. So it's a multi-pronged approach. I also think we have a great opportunity through the work that we're doing with our Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Department in terms of rewriting our Unified Development Ordinance and rewriting it in such a way that we create incentives to do new, more affordable housing in the city of Charlotte.
But it all costs money.
It all costs money.
How do you find the money to do what you would like to do?
So that's a great point that you raised there. And so it's not, the city's never going to do it alone, but certainly we recognize in the Opportunity Task Force report, there's a recommendation about an increased housing bond. We do housing, neighborhood, and transportation bonds every other year. We've traditionally done about 15 per year, and so the Opportunity Task Force report calls for up to $50 million. So it's more money, but even with that, Amy, it's important to know that that won't be enough. And so we need collaboration. We need collaboration from the private sector. We need collaboration from our other governmental partners, our CMS school system, and Dr. Wilcox, we've had a number of conversations about this. Partners like the Charlotte Housing Authority and Mecklenburg County. There's this best practice strategy throughout the country about using surplus land, whether that be old schools, whether that be underutilized parks. So it's really a community issue that's going to require community solutions, and it all gets back to money.
Money, such a double-edged sword. Stephanie, talk to us a little bit. You are brand new to Charlotte. How long have you been here? About 3 weeks?
3 weeks. You got that, Amy.
But you have lived economic mobility, being left as an orphan in India at Mother Teresa's doorstep, and being adopted and coming to the United States. Tell us a little bit about your economic mobility story.
Thank you, Amy. I'm delighted to be a part of Charlotte. And I think my economic mobility story really, although many people try to lift up as exceptional, I'm just an example. And the example is that with the right supports, with community investment, with family support, you can achieve those dreams that the report talked about. And so the struggle in order to reach the American dream, you need a family and community that believes in it. And the work of the Leading on Opportunity Council and the recommendations of the task force enables us to lift up core areas that build an opportunity structure system that includes early child care, it includes college and career readiness, as well as family stability. So I'm delighted to join the work in Charlotte that's already been happening with a number of partners, and to be a part of the community effort and really a movement towards saying that all children should be able to achieve their dreams.
You also know what it's like to be a single mom. So you didn't have your PhD handed to you on a silver platter.
No.
You had to work hard. And give us just a little bit of the real world experience of what it was like as you worked to get an education as that single mom.
Again, community really stepped in. Having a dream, knowing that education could open doors was the first part, but I also needed supports around me in order to ensure. I remember getting food stamps and the stigma that sometimes applies to families that struggle. And I think that when we see that if everybody gets the support that they need, then all children can achieve their dreams.
Very good. So here we go. We have some folks who emailed us questions in advance. And I have one from Ricky Hall from the West Boulevard Neighborhood Coalition, who asks, how do we make sure economic mobility priorities and solutions come from the communities affected? The idea of doing with versus doing for. Shall we start with Pamela?
Absolutely. That's really an important point, Amy. And one of the ways that we try to do that is through, again, Housing and Neighborhood Services. We have what's called community liaisons or neighborhood services specialists who are out in the community working with the neighborhoods on a daily basis to understand the neighborhoods, to interact with the residents, to know their concerns. I alluded to earlier, twice per year, we do what's called neighborhood board retreats, where we invite neighborhoods in to do annual strategic planning. We partner them with a facilitator, and when they come out of that, they have a strategic plan. We do an event. It's going to occur this year on April 21st. It's called a Neighborhood Leadership Exchange, and we tried this year, one of our main tasks will be to expose them to individuals who, with a thought, have jump-started an idea in their community. So I couldn't agree more with Mr. Hall. We never want to be in the business of doing something to somebody. We want to do it with them.
So, Bob, we have another viewer question. A gentleman named Sheldon, who works for Accenture, wants to know what are some examples of short-term actions that large employers like Accenture can pilot right now to improve economic mobility. So from a chamber standpoint, he's interested in that.
The laundry list is long. I mean, it starts with mentoring, it's reading in schools, it's supporting the number of nonprofits that are working in this area are huge. I think large employers, mentorship programs, internship programs, support for things like the Mayor's Youth Employment Program, which a lot of companies already participate in, adopting neighborhoods and adopting a generational approach of working with kids that are young to help them prepare them for their careers. And a lot of that can be done in partnership with CMS, a lot of it with Central Piedmont, and some employers, and I don't know if Accenture would fit this or not, employers that hire entry-level workers are now increasingly helping those workers to develop additional skills in the workplace that are not going to be applied in those particular companies. They know we're helping to educate and train these workers to move on to better paying jobs. That's part of the answer as well.
There are so many questions, and unfortunately this particular time slot of questions has ended. We're going to transition, but we are going to hear from each of you again in just a few minutes, so please stay close. It takes a real commitment to make a better life, and education is key to opening new opportunities. Carolina Impact's Suzette Rhee introduces us to a woman who knows firsthand what it really takes to move up life's ladder.
It's the end of the preschool day for assistant teacher Rashonda Strake. The kids leave at 3, and it's her time to prepare for the next day of school.
I'm just happy to be able to be here and work at my nursing job and help other people like me.
Straight is a preschool teacher. She's also a certified nursing assistant, and each weekend, she runs a child care service at her home. It's her path to a better life, far from her old life, one that included living in a shelter when she was in 5th grade.
I rode the bus. I got on and off at the shelter, so my classmates knew that I lived in the shelters.
And that is her biggest motivation for working so hard now.
Just being in that transition environment has made me who I am today.
After her day job, Straight heads to pick up one of her 2 boys while the other is at tutoring. Then they go to pick up her 4-year-old daughter from preschool, then off to pick up her 8-year-old daughter who goes to school far from home through the CMS lottery.
If she travels and see different houses and different cars and different people, she will know that it is something, different and better.
After school, there is downtime on a backyard trampoline. The perfect answer to having some sibling fun. She loves her 4 kids, but she admits there are many tough days.
Sometimes I'm at the point where I'm just like shaking because I'm doing everything by myself, and so just having awareness of getting that education, keep going, is something that I would like to share.
Straight hopes her story can strengthen others who are struggling with overcoming their own obstacles. Even with 4 kids and 3 jobs, Straight is also pursuing her bachelor's degree online. When the kids go to bed, she goes to school. Another choice she makes to give her kids the foundation she never had.
I just want to be here for them, not to struggle. Like to go to college and not worry about what I worried about. They're getting older, so I have to say things a little differently. My stress I have to handle a little differently, because they're watching me.
And they see her working nonstop, no days off for Mom. But Straight says that's okay. She believes all this hard work and education will pay off one day for her and for them. For Carolina Impact, I'm Suzette Reed.
Thanks so much, Suzette. Well, we've changed panelists to better understand the role education plays in the issue of economic mobility. James Ford is the co-chair of the Leading on Opportunity Council and a former North Carolina Teacher of the Year. CMS Superintendent Dr. Clayton Wilcox leads Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, and he joined the district just back in July. Dr. Candy Diedemeyer is president of Central Piedmont Community College. CPCC is a national leader in workforce development and happens to hold the license to PBS Charlotte. Dr. Patrick Graham is the president and CEO of Charlotte Works. The organization has launched a Careers for All initiative, which outlines strategies to promote upward mobility. Folks, we appreciate your time. We saw that profile, and I'm tired just watching her, working 3 jobs, taking care of her children, and getting her education. So clearly we all know the answer. Education is so important. So let's start with Dr. Wilcox. What a big job you've stepped into, sir. And you recently were quoted with your CMS Breaking the Link report that Black and Hispanic students in high poverty areas are being left behind. My question is, how do we fix it?
Well, I think it's a multiple kind of effect strategy. We've got to begin with early childhood and make sure that young people have access to high quality pre-kindergarten experiences. We've got to be supportive of the parents that are working 2 and 3 jobs and perhaps change our communication strategies with them, not expecting them to take time off of work and sometimes getting fired because we're asking them to come to school. So we've got to rethink how we provide services to families. But beyond that, I think we've got to take a very careful look at what we expect of young people. We've got to provide what I'm calling a guaranteed viable curriculum. You know, if you're going to one of our schools in the southern part of the county, it's got to mean the same thing as going to school in a more impoverished neighborhood. We've got to have high expectations for our teachers, for our principals, and for people like me. We've got to make sure that our young people get a great education.
So step 1, K through 12. After that, Dr. Diedemeyer. I know Central Piedmont Community College has created the Opportunity Scholarship. That's something we're pretty excited about. And I believe it was just over 40 students were the first on campus in the fall. How are they doing? And help us understand what that program is all about.
Thank you, Amy, for having us. So education is a game changer, and I think the Opportunity Scholars Initiative is really proving that out. Back in the fall, we invited 43 students to participate in that program. And it is a full scholarship for 2 years. For students that are coming out of the Title I high schools who need an opportunity, and they are engaged in a 2-year program. They get a laptop, they get a mentor. It's a very intentional program. So we're checking in with these students every week. How are you doing? What are the things that you need? How are things going at home? How's life? How are those jobs if they're working? We encourage them not to, because their tuition at this point is being supported by very generous and philanthropic donors. So we started with 43 in the fall, and because of that intentionality, I really do believe we've held on to all of them except 1, so 42. The one that had to leave the program moved away from the area, so it wasn't anything that wasn't controlled or intentional. So it's proving out that intentionality can matter. Those wraparound services that we know work with students on our campus do matter. The average GPA of that collective group for the fall semester was 2.8. So that's just, you know, a little below a B average. That's pretty great for students who are coming out and need some preparation and some real intentional work. I'll be able to report in May how their first academic year was, but we started that program in the summer with them, with a summer bridge program that is even more intentional. It teaches them how to navigate college life, which is very different than being in a high school. It teaches them how to reach out. It talks to them about a mentor and a coach. And so it's, again, the intentionality of preparation for a fall academic year on a college campus like Central Piedmont, and then continuing to do that really on a weekly basis with these students has been terrific.
Dr. Graham, your job is the next step. So we start K-12, we get some associate's degrees in there. Your job is workforce development. How do we help those folks that are out there, and you have a brand new program that's trying to make a difference? Tell us about it.
Well, one of the things, Charlotte Works is the workforce board for the city and the county. And so it's really our job to align the educational entities that you see here, along with economic development and also employers. And so one of the things that we've focused on in this Careers for All platform is to actually go out into segregated communities, because our belief is if segregation undergirds so much of what we found in the Opportunity Task Force study, we didn't realize, too, that we have to address that head on. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is actually sending out career advisors into those communities with trust partners. So these are agencies that actually have relationships with those communities. And when we did that, we actually saw an instant increase in the number of people that we could get trained and employed. So I'll give you an example. The year prior, in 2015-16, we placed a little over 5,000 people. When we instituted this actual strategy, that climbed to 7,065 the next year. Went from $70 million in salaries to $103 million. So I think that overall, the one thing that we have to do is look at those communities as assets, as valuable human capital. And I think part of it is that we look at them as something to fix, rather as something that actually can help benefit our community.
Great information. Now, James, the last time I saw you, we actually did a spotlight on you on PBS Charlotte when you were the Teacher of the Year, and I called you the rapping teacher. And every student, I loved seeing the interaction with your students. They looked up to you so much. You're not in the classroom anymore, but talk to us. You have that, boots on the ground experience of dealing with these students, and not all teachers are as engaged as you, finding ways to connect with the students. What's your experience, and where do we go from the workforce, teachers, who are with these students all day long?
So, and I appreciate you saying that, but I want to acknowledge there are a host of great teachers, particularly in CMS, but all throughout the nation. And so they may not all be on television, but their work deserves to be acknowledged. I will say that I always try to approach my work as somebody who brings in context, who doesn't teach these things in a vacuum. I was very honest about young people, about where they sit, how they're stratified within society, and I encourage them to use education as an instrument of liberation, of freedom, of being able to capture your dreams and all of your ambitions. And so that level of honesty and candor and helping them to become not just great students, but great people and be civic oriented and be engaged, that informed my pedagogy. And it's the same thing even on this side. I come to this work as somebody who wants to create social change. And although we talk about the three major determinants, it's really a system that's undergirded, as Patrick mentioned, by two other factors that we call cross-cutting factors. That is segregation, racialization, and social capital. And so understanding that you have to find ways to enact that social capital and be able to break those pockets of segregation is kind of the next level of the work I was doing in the classroom.
And you set me up. That's where I was headed. Dr. Graham, social capital and segregation. You've written a bit about this and have some very strong opinions. We'd like to hear them.
Well, one, I think that social capital itself is really still a product of segregation. So I really focus a lot on the segregation because it's the hardest thing for us to deal with, and we tend to shy away from it. One of the things, not just only getting out into communities and actually getting with those trust partners to develop relationships with communities that you can build with, but I think it's also other policies that we support that we know affect our workforce. For example, we were talking about housing earlier. I mean, we are deep believers in more dollars being put into housing trust funds where you can actually purchase in neighborhoods and hold housing stock for individuals who are in communities that are about to be gentrified, for example. How do you actually have them part of the new prosperity that's there? And with that, stabilizing them in a way that allows organizations like us, or systems like us rather, to come in and actually train individuals and have still support services that allow them to actually really grow. And when you think about career pathways, for example, that's really about how do you develop people long term. And they're going to take different paths, different walks of life when it comes to that. And so I believe really deeply that if we don't really address segregation itself in the very physical, not the metaphoric, it's metaphoric, but it's also a very physical thing, that we will not make ground in this.
Let's talk a little bit about the stigma behind vo-tech education. Dr. Wilcox, do you see a need for more vo-tech education? And if so, how do you deal with the stigma?
Well, absolutely. And the direct answer is yes. We across CMS are trying to increase the number of opportunities for young people to experience the dignity and value of all work. We're trying to make sure that our young people have experiences within the community and the schools that allow them to be successful, to raise a family, to have dignity. So we're doing a lot right now that a lot of people don't know about. We're creating career paths for young people within the schools where there's a sequence of classes that they take on the way to either an industry-based certification or a certificate recognized by the state. We're working with businesses across this county to develop internships, externships, and real-world work opportunities. We're working with the City of Charlotte and the Mayor's Youth Employment Act to tie that program to some of our young kids. So we believe that there's dignity and value in all work, and we believe that giving kids these skills to have employment right out of school is a necessary step for many people on the pathway to greater economic mobility.
And Dr. Diedemeyer, PBS Charlotte has been working this year at Vance High School, as you know, and it is a pet project of mine that I've had the good fortune to work with some amazing students in a career pathways and leadership program. And it is shocking to me that these students in very difficult situations, many of them are in foster care situations, and I'm talking to them about the jobs that they could get with a 2-year degree at Central Piedmont Community College. And there is a negative connotation to community college. How do we help them? And we bring them for a tour. Just this week, we had a group of students at a tour because they just don't understand what is actually in their backyard to help them have great futures. How do we help defeat that negative connotation?
Well, I've spent 25 years at community college education, and it's not a work that I'm willing to give up on because I know the impact that we have on so many lives. I'm a big believer that we need to change the narrative about opportunities because we live in a different world. And if we do not change the way we think about education, we're going to continue to have some of the very problems that we're talking about. I'm a big believer that we need to have different conversations with parents. I'm also, given the conversations that we're having in the community that we live in, we have to be really bold and recognize that all of our kids don't have a parent, that they have influencers in their life, whether that be counselors in our CMS partners, with our partners, or a grandmother, or somebody in their community, or in a foster home, whatever the case may be. We need to have real conversations with kids about what their options are. And the language that we use with people is very powerful. And many parents, I do a segment when I speak on occasion with various groups, and I always say, how many of you have conversations with where your kids are going to go or your grandchildren? And how many of those start with which football team or which color you're going to wear? And I think all of those are great. I'm a big advocate for 4-year degrees. I have several, but it's not the pathway for everybody. And so I also think we need to talk more to our young people about military service. That's a great avenue for a lifetime and a great career itself. Life, has a great wage with it, and it's great service. So I'm a big advocate. We need to have a long conversation about the opportunities, not just the narrative about community colleges. How do we change that narrative? I believe if you come to Central Piedmont, check out one of our 6 campuses and really understand at the end what economic mobility could happen at the end of some of those certificates a year, whether it's automotive or going into nursing or non-destructive engineering technology. Working at Siemens in an apprenticeship for 4 years and coming out with a $70,000 salary. If parents will come and have that conversation, or that life influencer, we believe that that will help change the narrative. If we could do it in a capacity, a scaled way, we do think it'll have some impact on changing some of the decisions that our parents along this continuum, remember this is a continuum, that if we can all have that conversation with some of those influencers in life, that perhaps it will change not only the connotation about career and technical education, which we also do, but community colleges and what's happening in the workforce.
Folks, much more to talk about, and we'll be back. Thank you for your time, but don't go anywhere. As job seekers, we'll tell you, finding a job can be a job in itself. Filling out just one application can take seemingly forever with all the pages of personal information, job history, education, and references to enter. But there are organizations that can help. Carolina Impact's Jason Terzes joins us from the Beatties Ford branch of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library with details. Hey, Jason.
The public library is, of course, where you have free access to the internet and will likely find lots of job seekers. Now, whether you're looking to build your resume, explore your next career, or read the latest local job news and announcements, one website you should consider checking out is Charlotte Works. They work with local businesses to find out what they're looking for and work with job seekers to help get them the necessary training. Let's take a quick look at their website and we'll show you what they have to offer. Now, here on their main page, if you go down to the lower right-hand corner where it says Career Seekers, down below where it says Getting Started, you have the English version as well as the Spanish version. And what that does is that connects you to the NC Works Career Centers. At those centers, people can speak with a career coach. They'll help you with your resume, interviewing skills, career advising, employer connections, and recruiting events. And the best part about all these services, they're free. So back up top here under industry data, if you go down to labor market information, check this out. It'll give every single job out there, whether it's audio and visual, accountants, bartenders, brokerage firms, bus drivers, the average annual wages of what people earn in Mecklenburg County, as well as the number of people employed and the average annual growth rate. So it really gives you a lot of great information as you're trying to figure out maybe what direction to go in a career search. So might you be eligible for a training scholarship? Those are available for certain lines of work. To get started, go to charlotteworks.com. All the forms and information are available to you there.
Thanks so much, Jason. We've brought back all of our experts now for this final conversation tonight. You know, so much to talk about and time is passing way too quickly. But James, can you tell us a little bit, and I'm going to ask everyone this, what are the biggest deficits right now that you see in dealing with this issue of economic mobility?
So I think that we have to adopt an equity orientation. I think that we have been so focused on this notion of the American dream and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and so conflicting ideas of what really creates opportunity is what we're confronting right now. And so equity really deals with not everybody getting the same thing, but everybody getting what they need. And so when we look at all of the development, all the opportunities and how they're allocated, we have to begin to ask ourselves a series of questions. Who is in the room and who gets to be able to speak? What are the potential unintended consequences? How does this affect certain racial and ethnic demographics? And when we get into the routine of asking those sorts of questions and we make them a part of our decision making, I think we'll be able to make up for that deficit. But I think that's an area we need to improve.
Dr. Wilcox, from an education standpoint, K through 12, what do you see as the biggest deficit?
You know, I think just the will. The will to do what we know is the right thing to do by all our children. And it builds on what James said. If we know that some people need more, some of our kids need more, then why don't we give them more? We have the resources to do it, but we have to have the will to do it.
Dr. Diedemeyer, so from a community college, getting people associate's degrees, what's the biggest issue?
Well, I think part of that is it doesn't have to just be an associate's degree, right? I mean, there are just some short-term things that land you in a good spot. There's a one-year program that can land you in a great spot. So understanding all those things, you know, the college offers 300 programs. And we believe that we can be a big part of that solution up and down the continuum of age and a range of opportunities. So I think just getting people an understanding of everything that we can do, I think we own part of that. I think we want the community to take part in that. And so I think that's part of it.
Dr. Graham, workforce development, biggest thing you've got to deal with.
I think the biggest thing is aligning business with curriculum development much earlier on in our school system and throughout that. And I think something that James mentioned too is just this religion of meritocracy that we have, this deep belief that everyone has an equal start. And I think that part of that is we have to start acknowledging more, first of all, that there is an equity, that we still have issues of race, class, and gender in what many of us think is a post-racial society. And I think that's one of the biggest things to overcome because we are in the choir. But there's a large public out there that doesn't necessarily buy into this notion of economic mobility because every day what they see currently is growth in their lives. And even though we went through an economic downturn of which everyone was affected, our memories are short.
Stephanie, we know you're new to town, but what do you see as the biggest issue that you can tackle in your new organization?
I think one of the biggest issues to tackle is, in addition to building upon equity in the will, is to ensure that there is actual action that happens. So we have to start with the conversations. We have to start with engaging diverse voices. Every voice needs to be at the table. And then from those conversations, taking collective action. And so that's, I think, where our work will continue to move forward in the Leading on Opportunity.
Pamela, let's talk about affordable housing. What's the #1 thing you want to tackle?
More collaboration. I think from a city perspective, I cannot think about addressing the great need for affordable housing in the city from a traditional perspective. Sure, I have my federal government funds, but I also have to collaborate. I have to collaborate with the business community. I have to collaborate with the government community. And I have to continue this notion of education, the community, about what affordable housing is, what it's not, and what its benefits are to the community.
Bob, what do you see as the largest deficit in the business community?
There's a particular public policy challenge. In our business, economic development incentives are part of the business. Those incentives are geared toward the higher the paying job, the more incentives the city, county, the state can offer. And we've figured that out pretty well, and it's part of the reason that we're growing. And yet, how do we incent a $40,000 a year job in some of the parts of our community where the needs are greatest? Can be good jobs for some people who don't have the skills for the higher paying jobs, and yet we don't have policies that help provide similar incentives for companies to invest in those concentrated areas of multi-generational poverty that we're talking about. So figuring that out from a public policy angle at both the local and state level is a key challenge for us.
So a question from our studio audience now comes from Ron, and I'm going to ask Dr. Graham this question. What is unique about Charlotte and our region that has led to our position as the lowest in upward mobility?
I think one is that we are probably the premier city for the New South. We're the gateway to the New South for many people. And so that brings challenges as our population grows. You're not just dealing with people who are here, but you're dealing with people who are coming. And so I found that that's one of the issues that makes us unique in this. I think, though, what doesn't make us that unique is the fact that there's still a history of segregation in the South, as well as other areas that still exist. And we have not really dealt with that. When we talk about the Swan case and the reversal of so many things in the past that have helped us desegregate, we have to really go back to the roots of some of these things and actually address them.
Sandy, who's here with AARP, wrote this question. What about affordable housing for seniors? Concerned about the livable communities and transportation resources, and how do we take care of those seniors related to affordable housing?
Sure. So our senior population is expected to continue to grow through 2040 here. People are living longer. That's great. And much of what has been done in the past with the city's housing trust fund has been senior housing. I'll point to examples like the Gables along the Statesville corridor, the Renaissance senior housing out in the Renaissance West community. So a lot of what we have been done is senior housing. So it's new construction for seniors. It's also helping seniors remain in place. There's lots of research that shows the benefit of them being able to remain in their community. So we seek to do that through partnerships with Habitat, through critical home repair, and through rehabilitation of their existing units so that they can remain in place. So we can never lose focus on the need for senior housing. So I would say continue some of the great programs that we have and continue working with partners like Habitat, Goodwill, and others to do more programs so that we can create new and preserve existing housing for seniors. And also the opportunity to locate new housing where possible near transit amenities like the light rail so they can get to their appointments if they choose not to drive or if they're not able to drive.
But some folks have said those areas are not becoming affordable because developers have come in thanks to light rail.
Yeah.
So what happens with that?
That's very true, Amy. And so again, back to this notion of intentionality, back to this notion of just acknowledging that it costs more to locate near transit amenities in many cases, and just really being willing as a community to make those bold moves in terms of the investment to locate and be intentional about locating senior housing, particularly in those areas.
James, I want to talk a little bit. We have to delve into race. It is such a huge issue, and how do we deal with it in a respectful way? Because it's sensitive.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, it's difficult because I think that we all feel personally implicated. And the truth of the matter is that interpersonally, I think that quote unquote race relations have improved over the past 50 years. What hasn't changed is the artifacts of racism, right? The institutional and the structural pieces have continued to persist, continue to produce the same outcomes. And that's difficult to acknowledge, but I think that the expectation of comfort when talking about these things has to be out of the window. We cannot think that we're going to grow, that we can be honest with each other, and really acknowledge the persistent ways that race continues to show up in every one of our sectors in significant ways without us being uncomfortable. And so I think that so long as we come to these conversations in good faith, so long as we are having conversations that are based in fact and rooted in history, then we stand a chance. But if we are going to continue sort of our aversion or look for ways to escape the table of conversation, then we'll be here the next 50 years, as the Kerner Commission report has recently kind of showed us.
Dr. Wilcox, so on that race question, you admitted that we were having challenges in CMS with our African American students and our Latino students. Can you give us what's the one specific thing that you see as the first thing we need to do to help that?
Well, I think we need to develop our cultural competence. I think we have to understand where our kids are coming from. You know, one of the things that just continues to boggle my mind is that we celebrate some of our kids' backgrounds by limiting them to 1 month of the year. You know, it just defies logic that if we want kids to be inspired and engaged, that we deprive them of seeing those inspirational voices and faces throughout most of the year. I think we have to completely reinvent our curriculum. I think we have to look very differently at the contributions of others in terms of this great American dream. This country was not built by old white men. It was not. You know, I'm a Mexican American. I'm stealthy because my surname is Wilcox. But I absolutely know that Mexican Americans had a great deal with building this country. And yet you don't see them reflected, not only in my history classes, but in our math classes. You don't read the great writings of Mexican authors. And so I think what we have to do as a community is embrace a change to our curriculum and a change in the way that we instruct our young people about the value that their ancestors have brought, but also about what's possible for them because they're standing on the shoulders of giants.
Bob, from a chamber perspective, Marty, who's in the audience today and lives in Fort Mill, wants to know, how are potential employers being recruited to provide opportunities?
That's a great question, and part of the reason I think I have some optimism around this conversation, companies increasingly, we have several examples, have chosen to relocate to Charlotte because of the growing diversity in our population. We grew the first 10 years of the new decade by about 32%. The white population grew by about 15%, the African American population by 50%, the Asian population by 90%, the Latino population by 150%. Companies have moved here because of that growing diversity. And so we've had this conversation with companies who are prospects. We say, look, we are 50th out of 50. We're not proud of that. We intend to do something about it. We invite you to come and be a part of that solution. And increasingly, companies want to join in the conversation and they want to be a part of the solution.
Dr. Dietermeyer, you have often said that you are in the transformation business. And this conversation of economic mobility certainly seems transformational. How do you continue the work that you're doing to help be a part of that positive transformation?
Yeah, actually the quote, Amy, as you know, is I'm in the life transformation business, and it's an honor because I can see the impact that we make on different lives. I've done that for years, but I think of a young woman who just shared a story with us a few weeks ago. She's lived in her car. She is an immigrant. She's left her entire family, yet she is now one of our scholars. And she gives back. She serves on campus, and she has a dream to go on and do great things. She's a person that we were so excited, and so her story is powerful that when the governor visited us a few months ago, she came and shared her story with him, because what we do at the college is we're open door. So we teach many people English as a second language. We have students who have intellectual disabilities. We don't have a door that's closed. We don't have an admission process. We go into communities and teach, and so I know that life transformation that can happen along that continuum, even just what we do inside of our our halls. And so very proud of that. But that's just one story. There are so many others. And you know, to James's point earlier, perhaps that goes back to the American dream and the bootstraps, but this is a woman of color. And she is grasped on, and there's no way that she's going to be defeated. There's also that will, right, that Dr. Wilcox talked about, is there's a will there that we just have to get behind, and that's inspirational. And those are the stories that I feel like we have to continue to tell, and tell to other students who want to come through that door and say, I need an opportunity, I need my life to be transformed, I want to do better and make a contribution to our community. And she does. She wants to make a contribution to our community, and she has, just by enriching our lives.
Stephanie, talk to us. What was the number one thing? You talked about the community wrapping around you that helped you pull yourself out of economic challenges and to go on and to get your PhD. Can you nail it down to one thing?
Oh, that's a hard question. It's a combination, but I think the one thing is that communities had the support systems, that structure in place, that there were policies and other things in place, so that when I went and knocked on a door, there were people willing and open and had established those policies in order to support families that struggle. And I think that's one of the things. We want Charlotte-Mecklenburg to be a place for all children and youth to succeed and to be able to achieve their dreams. And there are people here that have that will to make that happen. And regardless of income, your race, or your zip code, Charlotte-Mecklenburg can be that place. And so I'm excited and also very optimistic about what these conversations can bring as we work to move towards greater economic mobility.
So we've received another question from a viewer that talked about seeing a need to thin areas of economic despair. How do you do that? And is that necessary?
A reference was made to the city's capital investment program that is a decade-long investment of $1 billion around neighborhoods, streets, and housing.
Correct.
And those resources, we've passed 2 bond issues. We'll have a third this fall, and we'll have the 4th and final installment in 2 years. Those resources are disproportionately targeted to the geographies that we're talking about here. The idea being that if you can stabilize with the investment in infrastructure, stabilize those neighborhoods, they can be more self-supporting in contributing to the overall tax base of the community. So every one of us who are voters in the city of Charlotte can be a part of the campaign and the effort and vote to approve the bonds at whatever level they end up that are going to be on the ballot this November.
If I could jump in, if I understand the question clearly by thinning those areas, it goes back to this notion of equity, recognizing geographically that there are greater needs situated throughout the county. And there are certain structural things, although the fruits of those may not be born until probably 20 years, that could be done to make that happen. I think one of the options, and it kind of speaks to that, is this option of universal pre-K, right? We recognize that in those very same pockets, right, that there's not the ability to afford childcare. We also recognize the dividends and return on investment that universal pre-K bears out for children over the course of their lifetime. Options such as that, going back to Pam's wheelhouse, we're talking about affordable housing, and we're talking about mixed income, right? So not putting people squarely in one particular place, but making sure you bring folks from different income brackets, some market rate. Those are some of the long-term structures and strategies that help to create a pipeline that creates a more evenly balanced Charlotte-Mecklenburg for years to come.
Dr. Wilcox, I talked to 2 employees from CMS this week who said it is absolutely critical to start busing again. It is an unpopular conversation. What do you think about it?
Well, you know, I've said since I arrived in the community that I think the key thing for this school system is to have great schools everywhere. To build schools that people don't run from and try to escape to another school that they perceive is better. That's where I think our strength lies in the days ahead, because, you know, if we start pulling people out of neighborhoods, then we somehow give up a responsibility for maintaining that neighborhood. I think that's one of the unintended consequences of the large-scale busing days of the past. I do recognize that Charlotte-Mecklenburg was really held up as, you know, the school district that had done it right. But right now, I think we are a very different school system than we were in those days. We are a majority-minority school system. Today, 25% of my kids are Latino kids. About 38% of my kids are African-American kids. You know, if somebody thinks that the busing is the solution, there simply aren't the numbers to do that today. All said, I think we have to make great schools everywhere. I think that's the strategy for success for all of Mecklenburg County.
Okay, we are unfortunately running out of time, so I'm going to call this the lightning round, and everyone's going to get a chance as a final thought. Tell me, a year after this report has come out, how would you grade Charlotte's response to solving the problem? And we'll start with Mr. Ford.
Say B, just because I think there's room for improvement, but I'm very proud of the work we've done in terms of moving ahead and charting a course. So I give it a B.
Dr. Wilcox.
I know in the first 7 months that I've spent with the school system, I would give it probably a B, a B+. I think we are doing things within the system that will make a great deal of difference going ahead.
Dr. Dedemeyer?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a B. I have really appreciated in my 14 months here the hard conversations that many of us on this panel have had, the transparency and authenticity of those conversations, and the work that's come out of those conversations. So I'd say a solid B, B+ to my friend here.
Dr. Graham, your thoughts? Give it a grade.
Yeah, I'm going to probably err on the side of a B+, but I'm going to give us an A for acknowledgement and energy towards looking at the issue, and a C towards providing support to those already in the trenches doing the work. And so
Averages
I think
out to a B.
That's right.
Thank you. Stephanie, your thoughts? And you're just getting here.
Just getting here. I would definitely fall in the A-B range because part of what attracted me to Charlotte was the opportunity and the will that is here and the work that has been done and already started. So I'm in between an A and a B.
Pam?
I would say B+. One of those supports is that the City Council and our new city manager have created a department focused around housing and neighborhoods, which I have the pleasure of leading. I would also B+ to the community. I have had conversations in this community with people and in places that I never would have had several years ago about the need and the desire and their particular questions about what can they do to help with this notion of expanding the supply of affordable housing throughout the city.
Bob, you get to make the final statement. What grade would you give us?
Amy, I'm the chamber guy. It has to be an A+. I would say the body of research, and if you haven't read the report, I would recommend the research is amazing work and insight. The conversation that's been created, this being but one example, is rich. People out in the grassroots of Charlotte are talking about the challenge of this. We may be 50th out of 50 on the list. We're at the top of the list in terms of every community in America is dealing with this or not. We are. We haven't moved the needle yet. That will be the long-term test. Key question.
Well, thank you so much to our amazing panel of experts for joining us tonight, as well as our studio audience. We'll be asking each of you back for town halls over the next 3 years as we continue to follow this issue. And there's a saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. Here at PBS Charlotte, we believe it's important for all of us to do our part. And that's why we've launched a 4-year community engagement initiative called our 3D Project, Dreamers, Doers, Destiny. The project consists of 3 parts: teaching high school students career pathways and leadership, following the students who received the Opportunity Scholarships for a free 2-year education at Central Piedmont Community College, and spotlighting people in our community who have pulled themselves out of poverty. What can you do? Is your organization willing to join the effort? If you want to help, please contact us at economicmobility@wtvi.org. We'll make sure your ideas and comments get to the right resources. This is an important dialogue that is far from over, but is a topic we need to be talking about at work, at home, and with our friends. We hope tonight was a step in the right direction. We thank you so very much for watching, and good night, my friends.
Funding for this program was made possible by an American Graduate Getting to Work grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A production of PBS Charlotte.